everyone, welcome back to The Doctor Will See You Now. A consultation with a slight difference, but a consultation that just thrills the Doctor because transports her to a place that she absolutely adores. We're talking about crime fiction, we're talking about place, and we're talking about writing a book that might be encapsulating all that. If you will, please welcome into the consultation crime fiction author Michael Ridpath. Michael, welcome. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you so much for having published this beautiful little piece. It's absolutely gorgeous. It was so sparkly and so refreshing, during these difficult times where we're not able to travel and maybe visit the places that we love most. You've given us, those of us who are Icelandophiles, you've given us that opportunity. Thank you for that. Thank you. So you used to work, before you became a writer, you worked in the City of London. You've written financial thrillers. They've been published in over 30 languages. And then you turned to writing crime fiction featuring an Icelandic detective. For anybody who isn't familiar with you, Michael, that first move from working in the city to becoming a writer, how did that happen and why did that happen?
Well, I was a bond trader, so I was wearing a suit and trotting into the city on the tube every day. And I kind of thought, as a lot of people do, I wanted to do something creative. So I could have taken up photography, but I decided to write, do creative writing exercises. And my first exercise was to write the first chapter of a novel. So I wrote the first chapter of a novel, which was based on what I was doing as a bond trader. And it grabbed me, it really grabbed me. And I thought, well, forget all these exercises, I'm just going to write the whole novel. So I spent a year writing a novel, really for the fun of it. And it had all sorts of weaknesses. And I spent another year rewriting it and another year rewriting it. And then I sent it off to agents and it got published. So it wasn't a sort of carefully planned career change at all. It was more doing something for the fun of it. Writing about something I knew. I enjoyed thrillers. I enjoyed the thrillers of Dick Francis. So I was kind of trying to do a Dick Francis on the city as opposed to a Dick Francis for racing. And by good fortune, it was 1993 when I think I did this, and Britain was coming out of recession. There were no young British thriller writers. John Grisham had done very well with legal thrillers. So the publishing world was looking out for a young British white collar thriller writer, and I popped up, and that was just good fortune. So I was offered a surprisingly large advance, and I thought, yeah, well, let's go for it. And I was getting paid to do what I discovered I really loved doing. So I was incredibly lucky. That's all writers, I suppose, published writers have their big break at some point, and mine was right at the beginning of my career.
So that big break, you write those financial thrillers. They are, critically acclaimed. But when comes the moment and why that you shift your focus from those thrillers and you turn it, to another place as well? I mean, why, what drove you to that?
Well, I suppose there's two things. One is sort of commercial and the other is, I suppose, creative. So the commercial thing is, I told you I was the right book at the right time, writing the right book at the right time. I then began writing the same books, but at the wrong time. The world changed. People were less keen on financial thrillers. They were less keen on legal thrillers. The initial financial thrillers sold very well, but then the sort of sales were sort of steadily declining. And I realized that I probably should reinvent myself, which at the time seemed sort of like a brave thing to do. But these days, authors, if you want a long career, you have to reinvent yourselves 2 or 3 times. And so when I'd written the financial thrillers, I was writing about something I knew. And that's good advice for first-time writers, write about what you know. But having written 8 books, I quite like the idea of writing about something I didn't know and sort of kind of taking on the big boys and girls in, the well-known crime writers, thriller writers in out there who weren't in a niche. So I thought, let me, I'll try and write about crime or thriller in a wider world. And I decided to write a crime series, and it needed to be distinctive. So I thought I'd pick on a small, distinctive country, which I suppose is where Iceland comes in.
Mm. Had you been to Iceland prior to creating your series?
Yeah, one of the nice things about Free to Trade, my first book, was it was published all over the world, which meant I got invited to all sorts of interesting places. So I went to Australia, I went to America, I went to Holland, and I was invited to Iceland, which obviously isn't the world's biggest market, but I thought, yeah, that sounds fun. So I went to Iceland for 3 days, and I was bowled over by the place. It's such a sort of quirky, interesting, weird place with quirky, interesting, slightly strange people. It just really stuck with me. And I thought, well, it wouldn't be great to write a financial thriller there, set there. But at the time, I couldn't figure out how to do it. So it was sort of parked at the back of my brain, to the point where when I thought, well, where shall I write this crime series? The place that immediately popped up was Iceland. But I'm far too analytical. So then I spent ages thinking about other places, and I had a really good idea about a thriller in Saudi Arabia. And, you know, I sort of, sometimes you should just go with the first idea that pops to your mind. So eventually I kind of gave friends a choice between a Saudi Arabian thriller or a crime novel in Iceland. And everybody said they were interested in Iceland, didn't know anything about it. And lots of people said they were turned off by Saudi Arabia. So that was probably a good question to ask.
I'm intrigued though by, you know, those two places. I mean, such opposite, you know, geographical, climate, you know, there's differences that are there. And that speaks to me of, you know, just a mind that is not afraid to explore, you know, and then, you know, that advice that you were given, yeah, it's probably best Icelandic. And it would seem to be, I mean, I am amazed that Nordic noir is still so popular. You know, that I think of writing the book at the right time.
Yeah.
And, you know, people said, oh, that wave must have gone. And I don't think it has. I think there's still, you know, an appetite there for that. But back to your books, because whilst we're going to be focusing on this, I'd like to know first, if you wouldn't mind telling us about your detective, Magnus Jonsson.
Yeah.
Who is he? Where did he come from? And where are you at with him now?
Well, obviously, I had a problem writing about an Icelandic detective in that I'm not an Icelander. And I don't even, despite trying 3 times, I don't even speak Icelandic, really. So I needed someone I could relate to who was a bit of a foreigner. Also, the thing with Iceland is an extraordinary country, and I wanted to describe how extraordinary it is. And that's difficult sometimes for Icelandic authors, because to them, the extraordinary is ordinary. They can be driving through a lava field. They've been doing that since they were in the back of their parents' car. But first time you land, it is amazing. So I thought, well, I need an Icelander who is a foreigner at the same time. And so I thought, how could that happen? And I developed the idea of Magnus being brought up in Iceland. And then his father moved to America when he was 12. And Magnus followed his father there. And then his father was murdered in America. And Magnus sort of tried to solve the crime when he was 20 and couldn't. But he decided to become a policeman. So he became a policeman in America. So he's a Boston homicide detective who speaks fluent Icelandic. So then when the National Police Commissioner of Iceland comes to America to look for some help with sort of big city crime, Magnus is about the only person he can get. So Magnus comes back to Iceland. And then he's in a difficult position, because he's very proud of his Icelandic background, but of course to Icelanders, he's pretty much a foreigner. And he sees the differences between Iceland and America. And he's never quite sure whether he's at home in one country or the other, which is a theme I sort of quite like to explore. And he also had this problem of his father's murder, which is unsolved. And the roots of that, I decided, lay in Iceland rather than America. So in the first 3 books in the series, there's a sort of theme where he's trying to discover what happened to his father and why he was killed. So Magnus arrives in Iceland at book 1, and then obviously as the books go on, he becomes more used to the country, but he's still not really sure where he's from. And in particular, he meets this woman Ingeleif, who he falls in love with, but she's not a very constant lover, to put it mildly. And so that kind of on and off relationship is something that goes through the books. And at each beginning of each book, I kind of look at Magnus and I look at his life, and it's not quite right. But I think, well, how can I make it in this book a bit better and also a bit worse? So at the end of the book, his life isn't going to be quite right either. Because I think it's quite interesting for the reader and the writer if you can keep the detective slightly off balance. You know, things aren't quite right with him or her. He's unsettled, or she is unsettled, and then it gives you things to work with. And the character of the detective then kind of develops its own organic growth. You know, it's not as though you're following a master plan. The detective has his problems, and you and he go through the book together to try and sort them out, and more problems arise. So it makes it entertaining for the writer as well as for the reader.
And you know, are there more tales along the way?
Yes, I've just finished one actually. I've just finished one. Well, I say I've finished. I've sent it off to a couple of Icelanders. So the last thing I do is get 1 or 2 Icelanders to read it through to make sure there aren't any big errors. And there was one big error in the one I've just got back. So yes, Magnus has it's called Death in Dalvik. And Dalvik is a little town in the north of Iceland. And I just love the title Death in Dalvik. First time someone said she came from Dalvik, I thought I need to write a book about someone dying there. And finally I've done it. So yeah, there's a dead person in Dalvik, and Magnus goes there to sort it all out. And which meant I had to go to Dalvik, which given the problems of the last year and a half was a bit tricky. So I managed to go last month just, which was great because I haven't been to Iceland for a long time. I haven't traveled anywhere for a long time, but it was a little difficult. You know, all the high stakes form filling in and all that sort of stuff.
Was once past all the the necessary form filling? Was it still as beautiful as you remembered it?
Yes, and in fact, it was quite nice to go in the summer with very few tourists there, because these days Iceland in the summer, especially June, July, August, is packed. But right now it isn't. So if anyone, I mean, it's still in the green list. So if anyone has nothing that isn't doing anything next week, I suggest go to Iceland because it's great. It is, it's a one. Actually, I hadn't thought of this, but probably is a once in a lifetime chance to go there without it being full of other tourists.
Yeah, and as you say, the difference in between going to Iceland in the summer and where you and I have met before in Iceland Noir in November.
Yeah.
And I mean, the darkness is perfect for a crime fiction festival, but maybe not to be able to get around and see as much as one would like to, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I love Iceland in November. I mean, especially December's a bit of a problem because it's basically dark all day. So, but November and the sort of edges of winter, I think, are very evocative, as you know. But it's a different place in high summer. And I mean, when I went there, it just basically didn't get dark. In theory, the sun sets, but it just dips below the horizon and it's still light. So I would recommend going to Iceland off season. And normally that's what I say to people: go any time but July and August. But this is the 1 year where you can go in July.
Yeah. So now, tell me, how did this beautiful thing come about? Why did you do this?
Well, I've written for 10 years now. Every time I research anything on Iceland, I put it in this master file called Research by Subject, which has different little sections for dozens and dozens of things now. So cafes or restaurants in Reykjavik, little towns in west of Iceland, folklore, society, politics, all kinds of stuff. I got this massive research file. And I thought, and obviously for a book, I use, it's great for a book because anytime someone goes somewhere, I've been there, I can just read the paragraph about that thing. So it's wonderful for researching, but I never use all of it in one book, and lots of it I've never used in any of my books. So I thought, well, how can I do something with this? Really just give it to the world. So I thought, well, I should just link it up and publish it, just to let other people have that information. But being a storyteller, that seemed not quite right. So I thought, well, how can I make this into an interesting story for people? And I thought, well, it's really the story of how you research a country you don't know anything about is interesting. I mean, how do you do it? It's hard, it's difficult, it's a challenge. So I thought, well, it'll be about researching a detective series in Iceland. And then once again, as a storyteller, you need a protagonist. And the protagonist in this was me. So I then decided it would be about how I researched in Iceland. And that led me to think, well, the guy who's really good at doing this sort of thing is Bill Bryson. I love his books. So I just thought I'd put a little bit of humor in there. So it's a sort of slightly humorous or lighthearted account of how a crime writer researches a country. So there are several sort of different layers to it. And it doesn't include, I mean, it's only 200 pages long, so it doesn't include all my 400 pages of research, but includes the most interesting bits, those little nuggets that are quirky, strange. And the good thing about Iceland, for such a small country, is full of really interesting, tiny little bits of information. And, you know, over the last 10 years, I've met all sorts of strange people doing slightly strange things. So I've kind of stuck that in there as well.
It's great because I really, you know, I love the format, because of course, you know, when I first received it, and my initial thought was, I wonder if Michael has a favourite place in Iceland. It's great because you've clearly got more than one, because it's lovely that each chapter, you know, or nearly after each chapter, it's peppered with favourite places.
Yes.
And so you know, you take us around Iceland as well as sharing about your research. You know, you take us on that trip, and that is beautiful. But I am going to put you on the spot and ask you, out of all of those, if they told you that you could only return once to Iceland and you could only go to one place, do you know where you'd go?
I think I do. There's one spot which I think is, I suppose, the most beautiful place in the world. I mean, just for me. And it's a place called Búðir, the Hotel Búðir, or Búðir is how you would read it in English. And it's in Snæfellsnes, which is the peninsula north of Reykjavik. And there's a hotel in the middle of nowhere. And opposite the hotel is a tiny church called the Black Church, which is just this black little church. And if you stand by that church, you can see to the south the sea. Over to the west, you see this beautiful volcano with a glacier on top called Snæfellsjökull. To the north, there is this ridge of mountains with waterfalls coming down. To the east, there's this broad beach. All around is a lava field, which is supposed to be full of elves. And there's a ruined village there. And there are these kind of eagles flying around. There are horses running along the beach. It's just absolutely, when it's sunny, it's gorgeous. Or when the northern lights are out, it's gorgeous. Or even when it's sort of cloudy and misty, it's sinister and gorgeous. And so that, I think, is my favorite place in Iceland. And I'd recommend anyone to go there. And the hotel is a bit expensive, but the dinner is really good. They're very good on lamb and fish and all the sort of local ingredients. So that's my favorite place.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Now, there's a section in the book as well that you devote to, you know, to those ancient Icelandic tales, the sagas. And I wondered to what extent in your crime writing, do you ever draw on the sagas at all, either directly or indirectly?
I did. I mean, I studied history at university. I liked Anglo-Saxon history. So whilst I hadn't really read the sagas, I looked at them straight away when I was beginning to research Iceland. And Magnus Magnusson wrote some very good books about the sagas. And what surprised me reading the sagas was they're, especially in modern translations, they're actually very sparse. They're thrillers, and one of them, Njol's saga, is a legal thriller, and a good one at that too. So they're surprisingly modern. They don't have any of the courtly chivalric stuff of the contemporary European, Western European stories. They're modern thrillers about families arguing, which is where the term family saga comes from in English. So I thought it'd be nice to incorporate those. And then my first book, I was looking for some sort of international theme which I could add to Iceland. And Lord of the Rings came to mind, which if you've ever been to Iceland, you know, it looks a bit like Mordor or some of those other places. So I sort of thought, well, what if Tolkien had been inspired by a saga to write Lord of the Rings? I thought he probably had been, and in fact he had. And then I thought, well, maybe it was a lost saga that someone has discovered. And obviously it would be a big deal if someone discovered a lost saga behind Lord of the Rings. So I sort of invented it, and that was fun, because anytime you invent something in a novel, you have to go away and say, all right, okay, where are the gaps that can be filled by a fictional saga? And there was one lost saga called what was it, Gurk's saga, which was a genuine saga, which was lost in a great fire in Copenhagen in the 18th century. And that, from what little we know of it, because it's referred to, even though we don't have it anymore, I thought, well, that could be the saga that was Tolkien came across secretly and gave him the idea for Lord of the Rings. So that was it was fun. You know, it's a nice sort of little conceit, and it more or less stands up. You know, it's all plausible. Obviously, it didn't happen because I made it up, but it could have done. It could have done.
That's what that is. Again, the beauty of fiction writing. You know, I mean, you know, that it is credible. You know, that, yeah, why not? You know, if you can trace threads that might make it so, why not? And then again, even if you can push it a little bit further, it's fiction.
Yes.
Yes. So yeah, definitely. In your, you know, so in your years with Iceland, you know, from that first visit to the last visit, does it feel that the country's changed a lot?
Yes, it has. It's strange because until 2008, Iceland was becoming richer rapidly. So it was a sort of it was a sort of graph going upwards, as it were. They got hit particularly badly and particularly quickly by the crash in 2008 and 9. And Reykjavik was full of for sale signs. The country didn't quite go bankrupt, but it almost did. The banks essentially went bust. And there's lots of unemployment, which was a new thing for Iceland. So that was a down. The country came down, and then tourism came in to replace sort of financial engineering, and so the country boomed again. And as a result, it is changing. There are some things that are, I mean, Icelandic people. There's more immigration. I mean, every time I go, it's a good question, because every time I go, one of the things I do now is saying, okay, I know what Iceland was like 5 years ago. What's it like now? And so one of the first things I do is ask myself, okay, what's changed about this street? What's changed about Reykjavik? And the pubs change a lot, the bars change a lot, the restaurants change a lot. People's attitude changes a bit too. So I need to sort of keep on top of that. And I can get a bit complacent sometimes, thinking, I know what Icelandic society is like, but it's changing all the time.
I mean, I think, you know, the pace of life generally in the Western world, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, like changes like when I visit my parents, I mean, here in Wales, and as you drive down and, you know, you see, wow, when did that change? When was that built? So yeah, keeping an eye on a place, and how, again, because of that fictional context, and so, you know, what is happening to your protagonist and what is happening to the backdrop as well. And you know.
Yeah, I think the big change over a longer period in Iceland is they all used to be farmers, and then most of them now live in Reykjavik. So there's the thing which has happened throughout the world has happened in Iceland in the last 50 years. And so people still have grandparents who have roots in farming. The culture is rooted in farming, more than fishing, strangely enough, because the fishing thing was a sort of boom in the 20th century, whereas Icelanders have basically been sheep farmers forever. And they used to have these large extended families where people would have 9, 10, 12, 15 children. I mean, massive amounts of children, many of whom would die. And that's within 2 or 3 generations. So in Britain or even in Wales, that goes further back. But in Iceland, it's quite close. And so that's quite interesting. I think Aldur Indriðason writes about this very well with his Detective Erlander. He writes about the shift from the old Iceland to the new Iceland, and there are still old people with the old attitudes, and of course one of those is attitudes towards folklore and ghosts and the hidden people and elves and so on. It's an attitude towards farming and being tough outside, all that kind of stuff.
Is it important for you in your writing of Icelandic characters? How do you treat that aspect of folklore?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I suppose I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in all of that stuff. And I realized, and so when I first started dealing with Iceland, I mentioned it a little bit. And there are many Icelanders who don't believe in any of that stuff as well. But it seemed to me I couldn't really understand the country unless I sort of engaged with their belief in folklore. And actually, if you've been to Iceland in November and you've been in a lava field, I mean, it is. You do kind of believe in ghosts. And I mentioned in the book at the Hotel Búðir, was that crime festival, Iceland Noir. A number of people went to that afterwards. And Yrsa, who's one of the Icelandic authors, stood up and said, all right, everyone tell a ghost story. So the Icelanders stood up and told brilliant ghost stories. The Americans told a couple of ghost stories. The British did really badly at it because we're cynical, reserved, don't want to make fools of ourselves at it. And then there was a receptionist listening from the hotel, and she said, well, do you want to hear about the ghost in this hotel? And of course we did. And unlike British ghosts where it's some guy who was murdered with a head under his arm, this was Paulina. And Paulina was a chambermaid, and she's still there, and she's still quite keen on cleaning up. And so Icelandic ghosts aren't like, scary ghosts. They're just dead people who happen to be wandering around doing their stuff. So apparently a number of people occasionally bump into Paulina when she's clearing up. And the thing to do if you bump into Paulina is to say, thank you, Paulina. And then she goes away. So you have to be polite to this ghost. And it was such an Icelandic thing because it was a ghost that seemed real. I've described what this place Búðir is like. And of course, Paulina's grave is in the churchyard there. So we all went out and looked at Paulina's grave and said, thank you, Paulina. And it's hard not to believe in that. I mean, you have to be a real crusty cynic to say that's all rubbish. I mean, it just, whilst you're there, it seems real. And so in my books, I try and write about that with that kind of idea that it may well be real, it may not be, who knows. And you're a bit of an idiot if you just dismiss it out of hand.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, is it, again, you talked about that recent rapid change, and and so that folklore is still very prevalent, because it's those ancient tales that have crept, into the present. They're not held at a distance, they're from so long ago.
Yeah, I mean, Icelanders are very proud of their language. They're very literate. They read a lot, they write a lot. There's a theory that a language spoken by 300,000 people who all speak English should disappear. And Icelanders know that, and they're determined not to let it disappear. So they're very determined to hang on to their culture, meaning particularly their language, but also for many of them, not all of them, their folklore. And they don't want to say, well, of course, all this is rubbish, because then in a couple of generations, it will be gone. And it's so much a part of them and a part of their society and the countryside. Now, there is a significant minority of Icelanders who I call elf deniers. And if you talk to them about elves, they go crazy because they think it's all tourist, it's all rubbish for the tourists, and it's all a con, and they're modern Icelanders who understand that these things are just fake. So you've got to be careful when talking to Icelanders about elves. some of them get really upset. The elf deniers can get upset. And I overheard a wonderful interview where David Miliband was interviewing Katrín Jakobsdóttir, who is the Prime Minister of Iceland, and started talking about elves and basically putting Katrín on the spot as to whether she believed in elves or not, which for an Icelandic politician would be, that's a major statement to make. So she sort of ummed and ahed. I could tell Ed Miliband had no idea what the problem was, but I could tell that she was in real difficulty.
Yep.
Then she switched the subject to trolls, which is much safer, and talked about trolls, and that was fine. Because everyone kind of, for some reason, that's less emotive, because you see trolls around in frozen trolls in lava fields, these amazing stone formations which look like people. And, everyone could see those. Everyone kind of knows that's a bit of a fairy tale. So she played the clever politician there.
Because I also think there's less danger in dissing a troll than there is in dissing an elf.
Yes.
You just don't want to go there.
Right.
But now, tell me, have you done the ring road? Have you travelled all around Iceland?
No, I haven't. The problem is I only get to go there for a few days at a time, which means I can get quite far around the ring road. So I've got as far as the Jökulsárlón, which is the southeast corner, the glacier lagoon thing, which is wonderful. So that's going eastwards. And then the other way, probably last time, the furthest I've got is Húsavík, which is so I've got sort of 3/4 of the way around, but the East Fjords, which is in the east, I haven't managed to get to yet. And one day, I was discussing with my wife, I said, one day I want to drive all the way around Iceland. And she said, yes, dear, we will one day.
But I think it's lovely that you say, yes, we will, as opposed to, I'm not sure about that. Because I think, the notion of, you could set off and you could do that, and that's great. But I think a shared experience of something like that, to be able to turn to someone and say, look, or what did you feel? Or at the end of the day, wow, we did this and we saw that. So I hope it comes true for you.
It's true. I mean, one of the things I've really enjoyed doing is sorry.
No, please.
Yeah, one of the things I've enjoyed doing was after I'd written a couple of books was showing my family the country. So we took the children there, and my wife's been a couple of times, and they're very tolerant. They're very tolerant.
Yeah, I think that is most important. I wondered if ever you felt that you would, and again, I know it's traveling is difficult, and politically the world changes, but do you think you'd ever like to spend time, a consolidated amount of time living in Iceland?
I think I would, if it was just me, but my wife is American, and we've spent most of our time in Britain. So what we're trying to do now is spend more time living in America.
Yeah.
And living in 2 places is quite tricky. Living in 3 would be even more tricky. So I think that would be a step too far as the sort of domestic, my family is concerned, which is, perfectly reasonable. But I can see the attractions of living in Iceland. I like the values. They have good values. I mean, you go there and there are lots of kids running around outside on bikes, all the best sort of things of our childhood, or people my generation's childhood, still happen there. They have strong community spirit. They look after each other. They're hospitable. There are lots of good things about Iceland. Yeah. So although the weather's terrible, I would like to live there for a year or 2.
Yeah. But if you go, let me know, because it's something that I would love to do. But back to this glorious little thing. I'd like to sort of round off our consultation. If you tell us about the process of getting this book into being, how did it come about? What did you do for it to be published?
Well, it's I self-published it. So when I spoke to my publishers, who were Atlantic Books, they weren't interested in publishing that kind of non-fiction book, which is fine. So then I've been self-publishing my books in America. So I sort of had an idea of how to do it. I knew how to do it on Kindle, but self-publishing a paperback is much more complicated. and more expensive. So I paid for a professional cover, I paid for a copy editor, I paid for a proofreader, because I thought the book has to be good. I don't want to do something cheap and nasty. So it took quite a while, and it was one of those things I could either have done it with the basis, well, I have to do this and it's admin. I decided I may as well sort of throw myself into it and say, let's try and make the nicest looking book I can. And I actually enjoyed it. So I used a company called Ingram Spark to print it. Distribution is through Amazon and the main kind of Gardners and Waterstones and those sort of main bookshops. You can order it from an independent bookshop, but they won't have it in stock. I discovered trying to get self-published books in stock in bookshops basically means walking around to each one of them, trying to sell them 5, which, so my local bookshop has them, but that's about it. And then the other thing was, the good thing is, because this is, it's an interesting story. So publicity, I did my own publicity, or in fact, I recruited a publicity expert to help me, a PR consultant. And the publicity has been quite good. So strangely, I could do that quite well as a self-published author, whereas that would normally be a difficult thing to do. But I think people found this interesting. So it's been a good thing to do. It's also the closest I'll ever get to writing a memoir, because it is about how I wrote, you know, what I feel about Iceland. And there's something nice about, well, fulfilling about getting who you are and what you think out in a book for people to buy if they want to. So that's been very satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed the fact that I could hear you when I read. I could hear you speaking about, you know, experiences and thoughts on different aspects, and you know, there's lots of facts in there, but it is that very personal experience, and you know, and I liked the way you married together, you know, those aspects. It's lovely.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Michael, thank you so much for our time together, and for a chance, you know, as much as I adore crime fiction, and well, this book is still about crime fiction as well, but it's nice to, you know, it's nice to venture, you know, into a different space to do that. So the last Magnus Jonsson, the book is finished. When might we expect it?
Probably March or April next year.
Great. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. It just remains for me to say all the very best with Writing in Ice.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me into your consultation room. It's been a pleasure.
A pleasure. And I really hope that the next time we meet face to face in real life, as it were, I hope it's in Iceland.
Yes, that would be good. That would be good. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Bye for now.